A newborn, cradled in a baby sling. A toddler giggling over a favorite chocolate treat. A family member taking medicine for a simple headache. These were everyday moments, peaceful, routine, and wrapped in trust. But behind each one was a product from a world-famous brand, and a hidden danger no one saw coming. What followed were tragedies that shook families to their core, lives lost in ways no one could have predicted, all because of the brands millions rely on every single day. These are the most disturbing true stories where trust turned fatal.
Disgraceful. I can't comprehend what she's done.
A murder so inexplicably heinous, it still affects all of the officers called to the scene to this day.
Imagine waking up in a quiet, peaceful Australian town, never suspecting the horror that would unfold behind one ordinary-looking front door. In the year 2000, what happened inside that house in Aberdeen, New South Wales, was so twisted, so unimaginable, it would shake the entire nation and haunt it for decades. John Price was a well-liked man with a steady job and a couple of kids who adored him, but he made one fatal mistake. He let Katherine Knight back into his life. To the outside world, she might have seemed like just another fiery personality, but to those who really knew her, Katherine was dangerous, violent, unpredictable. A woman with a past soaked in blood and warning signs no one truly took seriously. Katherine grew up in a house filled with trauma. She claimed she was abused by men in her family, and that dark start seemed to shape her into someone who only knew how to lash out with fury. Over the years, she'd built a terrifying reputation, strangling her first husband on their wedding night, cracking his skull with a frying pan, stabbing another partner, even killing one man's dog to send a message. She didn't just lose her temper, she unleashed it. And yet, despite all the red flags, she kept finding her way back into relationships, one of which led her straight to John Price. Their relationship was toxic. Violent arguments, restraining orders, and one too many second chances. At one point, Price had even warned his co-workers, "If I don't show up tomorrow, call the police." He knew, deep down he knew something was coming. On the morning of March 1st, 2000, the blood smeared across the front door said it all. Police forced their way inside, and what they found was straight out of a nightmare. Price's body was on the floor, skinned, decapitated, and mutilated. His head was found boiled in a pot on the stove. His flesh, his actual flesh, was baked in the oven, served with vegetables on plates that had the names of his children written on them. And Katherine? She was lying nearby, barely conscious after taking a handful of pills. Not enough to kill her, just enough to drift away from what she'd done. Former detectives and first responders still talk about that day with a haunted look in their eyes. One officer recalled seeing Price's skin hanging from a meat hook, completely intact like some grotesque suit. It was the most horrific crime scene many of them had ever seen. The judge who sentenced her didn't mince words. He said Price's final moments must have been filled with sheer terror, while for Knight, it was pure enjoyment. That chilling contrast stuck with everyone who heard it. Katherine Knight became the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She's never getting out. And honestly, she shouldn't, because this wasn't just a murder. It was a descent into pure, calculated evil, the kind of crime that reminds us just how thin the line can be between human and monster.
St. Petersburg man in a house fire is under investigation after police believe it may have been caused by the vape pen that he was smoking. Investigators believe the vape pen exploded yesterday while the victim was at home.
It was a quiet Saturday in St. Petersburg, Florida, May 5th, 2018, when the unthinkable happened. Inside his home, 38-year-old television producer Talmadge Wakeman Delia, known as Wake to his friends, was enjoying a routine moment. But what happened next would shake his neighborhood, horrify first responders, and leave a family shattered forever. Wake had always been curious about tech, especially vaping devices, which were growing in popularity. That day, he was using a mechanical vape mod made by Smoky Mountain, a device known in vaping circles for its raw power, but also for its lack of built-in safety features. Unlike standard e-cigarettes, these mods don't have circuit boards, automatic shutoffs, or protections against overheating. They rely entirely on the user's knowledge of battery types, of voltage, of risks. But no one expected what happened next. Somewhere between the moment he picked it up and the moment everything went silent, the vape pen exploded. The force of the blast was immense, violent enough to send shards of metal flying across the room. One of those fragments struck Wake directly in the head. Another pierced his skull. Within seconds, a fire ignited. His bedroom became an inferno. By the time the smoke was visible from outside, it was already too late. His neighbor, Dale Klein, saw the haze curling out of the house and ran over, hoping it was nothing. But inside, the scene was grim. Wake's body was found upstairs, where the explosion had done the most damage. Over 80% of his body had been burned. Fire officials later said the smoke in the rest of the house was minimal, proving just how contained and how violent the blast had been. The community was stunned. Wake wasn't just another statistic. He was a respected freelancer who'd worked with CNBC and NY1 News, a kind, intelligent man known for his professionalism and warmth. No one could make sense of it. How could a vape pen, something marketed as a sleek alternative to smoking, end a life so suddenly, so violently? The investigation pointed to the Smoke E Mountain mechanical mod. These devices, while favored by some experienced users for their customization and power, are inherently risky. They draw energy straight from the battery with no regulation. There's no failsafe, no buffer. If the battery malfunctions, or if it's mismatched or mishandled, it can become a ticking time bomb. And that day, for reasons still not fully clear, it did. Whether it was a faulty battery, improper assembly, or an internal short, the result was catastrophic. Wake became the first known person in the United States to die from a vape pen explosion. According to FEMA, there had already been nearly 200 incidents involving exploding e-cigarettes between 2009 and 2016. Most caused injuries, some severe, but none had been fatal, until now. Wake's autopsy confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Fragments from the vape device had embedded in his skull. His father, Christopher D'Elia, later spoke with heartbreak in his voice. "No parent should have to experience such a loss," he said. The company behind the vape pen claimed their devices weren't meant to explode, that maybe a battery or atomizer failure was to blame. But there was no admission of fault, no clear apology, just another vague reminder that mechanical mods require experience, that they're not for everyone. But the real question echoed far beyond the D'Elia family's grief. Why are these devices being sold at all if a single misstep can turn them into deadly weapons?
We have breaking news this morning about a very popular baby product. We first brought you the warning 2 weeks ago about the dangers of baby slings. This morning, 1 million baby slings are being recalled. They're being taken off store shelves, and they will no longer even be made.
It was supposed to be just another helpful tool, a sling. Soft, convenient, comforting. But for one young Oregon family, what seemed like a thoughtful invention turned into an unthinkable nightmare. Lisa Cochran and Jared Fowler were only 6 days into parenthood, just beginning to feel the weight and wonder of caring for their newborn son, Derek. They were exhausted, overwhelmed, happy, the kind of tired joy only new parents understand. On May 7th, 2009, they decided to get out of the house for a bit, to run errands together, to breathe fresh air, to return briefly to something like normal life. They loaded Derek into the car and headed to Costco in Salem. Lisa cradled her tiny son in a product called the Sling Rider, made by California-based company Infantino. It draped across her chest, creating a cozy pouch where Derek could rest against her. The design had become trendy, marketed as intimate, safe, ideal for bonding, the kind of thing you'd trust just because it was sold for babies. Derek had been fussy that morning. Lisa nursed him twice before they left, hoping the familiar warmth would soothe him. It seemed to work. Once he was nestled inside the sling, he quieted, peaceful, still. As they wandered the aisles, carrots, oranges, oatmeal, little essentials for their new life, they kept glancing at Derek. Assuming he was sleeping, everything seemed fine. Nothing looked wrong. They even sat down for hot dogs in the food court, feeling for a moment like any ordinary couple with a new baby. But the truth was already unraveling. Quietly, invisibly. They didn't know that inside that sling, Derek had slipped into a position that babies cannot survive. His tiny chin curled forward. The soft pouch pressed his face against fabric, against his mother's chest. No struggle, no cry, just silence. By the time they returned to their van in the parking lot, Derek hadn't made a sound in over an hour. But babies sleep, don't they? They sleep a lot. Then Jared noticed it. Something in Derek's color. Something is wrong. They pulled him out of the sling, and the world shattered. His back had turned blue. He wasn't breathing. Jared performed CPR, trying to bring his son back to life. But there was no breath, no heartbeat. Derek Fowler, just 6 days old, was gone. Later, the medical examiner's report would confirm what Lisa and Jared already lived with every day: compression asphyxia. Derek had suffocated while pressed inside the sling. And this was not the first time. Reports began to surface, warnings that had been whispered for years. Since 1998, at least 7 babies had died, and dozens more had been seriously injured in slings like the one Lisa used. Experts had long known the risks, that the fabric could force an infant's chin to their chest, cutting off airflow, or press tightly against their nose and mouth without anyone noticing. The babies couldn't cry out. They couldn't shift. They just stopped breathing. Don Mays, head of consumer safety at Consumer Reports, had already written a report warning about the dangers of the sling rider. Months before Derek died, he knew, others knew, but the product was still on the market. It took Derek's death, one more name in a growing list, for anyone to finally act. In the aftermath, more than 1 million of these slings were recalled. Lawsuits were filed. Infantino was forced to confront the truth, that their design, cozy and convenient as it appeared, was hiding a lethal flaw.
You say, uh-oh, not me. Hi.
For 13 summers, Timothy Treadwell lived what many would call a dream, roaming the wild Alaskan wilderness, surrounded by towering grizzlies, sleeping under the stars, whispering to bears like they were old friends. He called them his family. He believed he could protect them, but the dream that consumed him would eventually devour him, literally. It was October 2003. The season was late, dangerously so. Most grizzlies had already vanished into their dens for hibernation. But not all. The ones that remained were lean, desperate, and hungry, driven by survival instincts stronger than any bond Treadwell thought he had forged. Alongside him was Amy Huguenard, a quiet, intelligent physician assistant who had followed Treadwell to Katmai National Park, though not without fear. Her diary hinted at unease. She didn't trust the bears, not like he did. She wanted to leave, but love can be a heavy chain, one that drags people far beyond their limits. They were supposed to return to California. Bags were packed, flights arranged, but a last-minute argument with an airline ticket agent unraveled their escape. Treadwell, impulsive and defiant, chose to go back into the park instead, back to the bears. He wanted to stay 1 more week. He wanted to find a specific female bear he hadn't seen. He wanted something. He set up camp near a salmon stream. It was a known feeding site, but that year the salmon were scarce, and the bears that remained weren't the ones he knew. These weren't the familiar faces from summers past. These were strangers, wild, unpredictable, starving. Treadwell recorded footage that day, hours before his death, of a bear diving into the river for scraps. You can hear it in his voice.
Cracker, and she's enjoying a fish right now. I love you, Cracker. I do love you. She's my friend.
The tension, the uncertainty. He says he doesn't feel right around that bear. And maybe, just maybe, he knew. Somewhere deep down, he sensed the curtain was closing. On October 5th, he made a final satellite phone call to a friend in Malibu. He said nothing about danger, just routine chatter. By the next day, he and Amy were dead. The pilot who flew in to pick them up on October 6th found the camp eerily quiet, tents flattened, supplies scattered, and a large male grizzly lingering close by. When park rangers arrived, what they discovered was horrifying. Treadwell's dismembered remains lay not far from the campsite. His severed head, a portion of his spine, and a right arm still wearing his wristwatch. Nearby, Amy's remains had been partially buried in a mound of sticks and dirt, a bear's instinctual food cache. The bear guarding the area was shot and killed. A second, younger bear charged at rangers and was put down as well. Inside the first bear's stomach, human fingers, limbs, pieces of both Treadwell and Huguenard. But what sent a deeper chill through investigators was what they found in the wreckage. A video camera, battered but intact. It hadn't recorded any images of the attack, only sound. 6 long, agonizing minutes of screams, snarls, and desperation. The tape begins with Treadwell shouting that he's being attacked. "Come out here, I'm being killed out here." Amy can be heard pleading for him to play dead. The bear retreats, then returns. There are more screams, then silence. Not even the camera lens had been removed. It had all happened that fast. Filmmaker Werner Herzog, who later created the haunting documentary Grizzly Man, speculated that the camera had been turned on as they were setting up another shot, likely their last. He refused to play the tape publicly, saying it was too disturbing, too intimate, too final. Treadwell had broken every rule of the park. He camped too close, interfered with natural behavior, treated the wild like a playground. Authorities had warned him repeatedly, but he didn't listen. He believed he was different, that the bears knew him, that he was one of them. Tom Smith, a seasoned wildlife ecologist, said it plainly. It's a tragic thing, but it's not unpredictable. In the end, Treadwell's passion became his undoing. He wanted to protect the bears, but in trying to make them human, he forgot that they are not. Nature is beautiful, but it is brutal, unforgiving, and not meant to be tamed. And as the Alaskan wind howled through the pines that October, Timothy Treadwell and Amy Huguenard became part of the wilderness he so dearly loved, consumed by the very creatures he died trying to understand.
Added Ford's failure to act resulted in the deaths of 3 women on an Elkhart County road. Centino said Ford management was told a $6 per car improvement might prevent fuel from leaking in a rear-end collision. But management decided it was too costly.
It was a quiet summer evening in 1978, the kind where nothing feels urgent and everything seems safe. 3 teenage girls, Judy Ulrich, 18, her sister Lynn, 16, and their cousin Donna, also 18, were headed to a volleyball game in Indiana. The road stretched peacefully before them along U.S. Route 33. Judy was behind the wheel of their 1973 Ford Pinto. At some point during the drive, she pulled over to the shoulder of the road, just a quick stop to tighten the gas cap after filling up. A simple errand, harmless, routine. Then everything changed in an instant. A van, driven by 21-year-old Robert Duggar, came up behind them. Maybe he didn't see them in time. Maybe it was just bad timing. Either way, he rear-ended the Pinto. It wasn't a high-speed crash. Under normal circumstances, it might have just been an insurance claim and a shaken conversation on the roadside. But these weren't normal circumstances. The moment of impact tore open a deadly secret Ford had been hiding. The Pinto's gas tank, positioned right behind the rear axle, outside the protective frame of the car, ruptured. Gasoline spilled out, and in seconds the car ignited. Flames exploded around the girls. Lynn and Donna were trapped. There was no time to react, no chance to escape. They were consumed by the fire. Judy survived the blast barely. She was rushed to the hospital, her body scorched by the flames. For 9 agonizing hours, she fought to live. But the burns were too severe. She died later that night. 3 young women, full of life, wiped out in a crash that should never have turned deadly. But the most horrifying part, it was preventable, and Ford knew it. As investigators dug into the crash, attention turned to Pinto's design, specifically that vulnerable fuel tank. This wasn't the first time a Pinto had gone up in flames after a rear-end collision. Whispers of its danger had circulated for years, even within Ford itself. But this time, the crash hit harder. This time, it was impossible to ignore. Then came a cruel twist of fate. In the months after Judy and Lynn's deaths, their grieving parents received a recall notice from Ford for the very car that had killed their daughters. Too late, far too late, and it got worse. Court documents and internal memos revealed the unthinkable. Ford had known about Pinto's deadly flaw. Engineers had flagged it. Executives had discussed it, and still, they did nothing. A chilling cost-benefit analysis had weighed the price of human lives against the cost of redesigning the car. Ford had decided it was cheaper to let people die and quietly settle the lawsuits than to fix the problem. The outrage that followed shook the nation. Lawsuits piled up, protests grew. Under pressure from regulators and the public, Ford finally issued a massive recall in 1978. More than 1.5 million Pintos pulled from the streets, but the recall didn't undo what had already been done. It didn't bring back Judy, Lynn, or Donna. It didn't erase the pain that had seared itself into the lives of their families. The Pinto scandal became one of the darkest chapters in American automotive history. It exposed how corporations could gamble with lives and lose. It forced the country to reckon with a terrifying truth. Even a trusted name can hide something lethal. Ford stopped producing the Pinto after 1980, but the name still lingers, a symbol of greed, negligence, and lost lives.
Basically, I control 3 different arms. Got 2 on my right hand and 1 on my left, and also control the camera.
It was September Day in 2021 when 78-year-old Sandra Sulzer was wheeled into the operating room at Baptist Health Boca Raton Regional Hospital. She was there for a surgery meant to give her more time, a procedure to treat her colon cancer. Her husband, Harvey, waited anxiously, clinging to hope. They both believed they were in good hands. After all, the operation would be performed using cutting-edge technology, the Da Vinci surgical robot, a marvel of modern medicine. This sleek, high-tech machine was designed to offer unmatched precision. Surgeons no longer needed to stand over their patients. Instead, they sat at a console, guiding robotic arms with delicate movements through tiny incisions. The promise was revolutionary. Less pain, faster recovery, fewer risks. But behind that promise lay something far more dangerous. Sandra's surgery, by all appearances, went smoothly. She was sent to recovery, and the doctors assured Harvey that everything had gone as planned. But soon after, Sandra began to suffer. She complained of excruciating abdominal pain. Her temperature spiked. The medical team chalked it up to typical post-surgical symptoms. Normal, they said. Common. But something was terribly wrong. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. The cause? During the operation, an electrical current had escaped from the robotic arms, searing a hole into Sandra's small intestine. The surgeons never saw it. They couldn't. The insulation meant to prevent that energy from leaking was defective. Cracks in the protective rubber sleeves allowed electricity to spark where it shouldn't have, deep inside Sandra's body. No alarms sounded, no warnings triggered, and so the damage went unnoticed. Digestive fluids slowly seeped into her abdomen, poisoning her from within. The infection spread, overwhelming her body. She was rushed into further surgeries in a desperate attempt to save her life. But the infection had taken root. It was too late. Sandra fought for months, but in February 2022, she passed away. What was supposed to be a life-extending procedure had become a death sentence. Her husband Harvey, shattered by grief, began to search for answers. What he uncovered was chilling. The Da Vinci robot, made by Intuitive Surgical, had a known flaw. Those rubber sleeves that were supposed to contain electrical energy. They had failed before, multiple times. Reports had been filed, complaints made. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration had even investigated. This wasn't a one-time tragedy. It was part of a pattern. Between 2009 and 2011, Multiple patients had suffered internal burns due to the same electrical leak. In 2013, the FDA warned the company that it was failing to report these incidents. By 2014, Intuitive Surgical was facing over 90 lawsuits, and still, the robots were being sold, used, trusted. In 2018, an NBC News investigation revealed something even more staggering. Over 20,000 adverse events involving the Da Vinci system had been reported to the FDA. Many of them involved the exact same type of injury that killed Sandra: burns from electrical energy, preventable, predictable, ignored. And then there was the issue of training. Intuitive Surgical offers instruction on how to use their robots, but they can't require it. There's no law mandating that surgeons be fully trained before using these complex machines. Some had only minimal experience before performing real procedures. Inexperienced hands controlling powerful, high-tech tools. The consequences? Catastrophic. Sandra's death wasn't just a medical accident. It was the result of a system that prioritized innovation over safety, sales over transparency, image over accountability. Her life was lost not because of a single error, but because of years of warnings that went unheeded, because no one stopped to ask, what happens if this goes wrong? Harvey Sulzer is now fighting back, not just for his wife, but for every patient who has trusted these machines with their lives.
This was a terrible tragedy for 7 families.
He took my life, shattered my life and my family life.
In 1982, America was shaken, not by a war, not by a natural disaster, but by something far more chilling. The realization that even the most ordinary part of daily life could turn deadly in an instant. It started quietly, with a handful of people reaching for relief, something for a sore throat, a headache, a minor pain. They weren't reckless, they weren't doing anything dangerous. They were just like any of us, and they trusted the name on the bottle. That trust cost them their lives. The first victim was 12-year-old Mary Kellerman, a bright-eyed girl from Elk Grove Village, Illinois. On the morning of September 29th, she had a runny nose and a sore throat. Her parents gave her a capsule of extra-strength Tylenol. Minutes later, she collapsed. By the next day, she was gone. Her death felt sudden, tragic, and unexplainable, but it was only the beginning. Later that same day, 27-year-old Adam Janis, a family man from Arlington Heights, took a Tylenol capsule for minor chest pain. He collapsed and died shortly after. In the unimaginable hours that followed, as his family gathered to mourn and support each other, 2 more lives were lost: his younger brother Stanley and Stanley's wife Teresa. They had each taken a capsule from the same bottle while at Adam's home. Within minutes, both collapsed. Both were dead. 3 members of one family, gone, and no one knew why. Across the Chicago area, more deaths followed. 31-year-old Mary McFarland, a working mother, took Tylenol during her shift and never made it home. Paula Prince, a 35-year-old flight attendant, was found lifeless in her apartment, an open Tylenol bottle on the counter. Mary Reiner, just 27, had recently given birth. She took Tylenol to ease her recovery. She never stood a chance. All were healthy. All trusted what they were taking. All were dead. The pattern was subtle at first. Different ages, different towns, different situations. But the death toll was climbing fast. Fear began to spread, and with it came a haunting question: what was killing them? The breakthrough came not from high-ranking officials, but from Helen Jensen, a sharp-eyed public health nurse from Arlington Heights. Sent to investigate the Janis deaths, she noticed a bottle of Tylenol on the kitchen counter, with a receipt from that very day. 6 capsules were missing. Her gut told her something was wrong, something deeply wrong. She handed the bottle over to authorities. What came next confirmed every fear. Nick Pichos, an investigator with the medical examiner's office, opened the bottle and immediately noticed something strange: a faint almond-like odor. It was the unmistakable scent of cyanide. Further testing by toxicologist Dr. Michael Schaffer revealed a terrifying truth. 4 of the remaining capsules contained enough potassium cyanide to kill several people, nearly 3 times the lethal dose. The capsules weren't medicine. They were poison. A warning was issued across Chicago. Panic exploded. Shelves were cleared. Households stared in horror at their medicine cabinets. What had once been a trusted staple was now a potential killer. Investigators scrambled to trace the origin of the tampered bottles. Mary Kellerman's Tylenol had come from a lot labeled MC2880, the same lot as the Janus family's. But it didn't stop there. Other contaminated bottles were traced back to different lots. The poisoning wasn't limited to a single batch. This was no manufacturing error. This was deliberate, calculated, and devastating. Then a letter arrived. A man named James William Lewis, living in New York City, claimed responsibility. He demanded $1 million to stop the killings. He was arrested and convicted, not for murder, but for extortion. And while he sat in prison, the families of the victims sat with a heavier truth. The killer had still not been found. To this day, more than 4 decades later, no one has ever been charged with the murders. 7 innocent people died, but the ripples reached far wider. Trust was shattered. Confidence in over-the-counter medication gone. But from the ashes of that nightmare came reform. Tamper-evident seals, child-proof caps, clear warning labels. All of it became law because of what happened in Chicago, because of those 7 lives.
On January 19th, 1996, fate decided to deal a tragic hand to this 19-year-old, leaving behind a tale shrouded in enigma and unspeakable horror.
In the bitter chill of January 1996, Nanjing, one of China's oldest and most storied cities, became the setting for a crime so grotesque, so calculated, that it continues to haunt the country nearly 3 decades later. Diao Aiqing was just 19 years old. A bright, curious student from Hunan province, she had recently enrolled at Nanjing University. On January 10, 1996 in the evening, Diao and her dormitory roommate were punished for the illegal use of an electrical appliance. After a conflict with the dormitory management, she left the building and did not return. Diao was last seen alive wearing a red coat with a black lining. She was reported missing, but her family was not notified by the authorities until January 19th. For days, her family held out hope. Her classmates searched. Her father, desperate, remained glued to the phone. But 9 days after her disappearance, that hope was ripped away in the most horrific fashion imaginable. The discovery began not with detectives, but with a city sanitation worker. On a routine morning near the university, the worker stumbled upon a plastic bag filled with raw meat. Believing it to be discarded pork, he brought it home to cook. It wasn't until he was preparing it in his kitchen that something stopped him cold. 3 human fingers, pale and unmistakable, were nestled inside. The horror of that moment would open the floodgates. The worker alerted the police, who quickly confirmed the chilling truth. The flesh in the bag was human. What followed was a gruesome cascade of discoveries. Over the next several days, more plastic-wrapped packages began to appear across Nanjing. Some were tucked under benches near a stadium. Others left at the university's front gate. More were found along roadways, by a hospital, even at a public bathhouse. Altogether, body parts were recovered from at least 8 different locations. The remains, painstakingly and deliberately dismembered, belonged to Diao Aiqing. Her head and clothing would not be found until January 30th, completing a picture of slaughter that defied logic and stunned seasoned investigators. The details chilled the nation to its core. Her body had been meticulously dissected. More than 2,000 human remains were recovered. Diao's head and internal organs were boiled for several days. Crucial organs, including the heart, liver, and spleen, were never found. The forensics team was only able to identify the remains as belonging to a female through the analysis of body hair and muscle tissue. Relatives were able to identify her through a mole on her right cheek. A senior officer involved in the case described the killing as really cruel. The officer added that pieces of flesh were dissected with high precision only achieved by an individual with great understanding of anatomy. Police concluded that the murderer must have been a professional butcher or surgeon. This was no frenzied attack. It was precise, methodical, almost medical. Whoever did this had anatomical knowledge, access to tools, and time. Time to mutilate, package, and distribute her remains without being seen. When police broke the news to Diao's father, he collapsed. His daughter hadn't simply been murdered. She had been erased, carved apart, and scattered like refuse across the city that was supposed to protect her. Panic spread. Was this a sadistic act by someone she knew? A calculated strike by a medical expert? Rumors swirled. Could it have been a fellow student? A professor? A foreigner? Some whispered about black market organ trade or university cover-ups. But despite extensive interviews, DNA testing, and nationwide investigations, no suspect was ever arrested. No one confessed. No one was charged. To this day, Diao Aiqing's killer walks free. The Nanjing University mutilation case remains one of the most disturbing and unsolved crimes in Chinese history. It's not just the cruelty that lingers, but the silence, the unanswered questions, the dead ends, the justice that never came. For many, it's not just a cold case. It's a wound, a terrifying reminder that even in a city filled with students and scholars, evil can strike in silence and vanish just as quickly.
Burger King is recalling millions of Pokemon balls after a baby playing with one died.
Jillian Alto never imagined that something so small, so seemingly harmless, could destroy her world. In the quiet of their home in Sonora, California, she watched her baby daughter, Kira Alexis Murphy, giggle and play in her little playpen, clutching a brightly colored toy shaped like a Pokeball. It had come from a fast food kids meal, one of those plastic novelties that millions of parents across the country had brought home without a second thought. There were no warnings, no instructions, just another toy in a world built for children. Kira was the youngest of Jill's 3 daughters, just 13 months old, still discovering what her hands could do, what the world felt like. As a single mother, juggling 3 kids under the age of 6, Jill did what any parent might do in a rare moment of peace. She stepped away. A quick shower, 10, maybe 15 minutes, just long enough to recharge before the chaos of feeding, dressing, and wrangling little ones began again. But behind the bathroom door, a silent nightmare was unfolding. Kira had been surrounded by toys. Safe, Jill thought. Contained. But her curious little hands had managed to pry open the red and white Pokeball, splitting it into 2 halves. To her, it wasn't a choking hazard. It was just something new, something shiny, something to explore. She lifted the red half to her face. In an instant, it formed a deadly seal over her tiny nose and mouth, a perfect, airtight trap. She couldn't call for help. She couldn't make a sound. By the time Jill stepped out of the shower, everything had already changed. The house was too quiet. When she reached the playpen, her world stopped. There lay Kira, unmoving, silent, the plastic still covering her face. Jill tore it away, screaming, begging, hoping for breath, but it was too late. Her baby was gone. The horror didn't end there. Jill's 2 other daughters, 5 and 4, had witnessed the aftermath, watched their mother sob over the still body of their baby sister, unable to comprehend what had happened. What followed was a different kind of devastation, one driven by rage, disbelief, and betrayal. That Pokeball toy had been part of Burger King's wildly successful Pokemon promotion. Tens of millions of them had been handed out nationwide. Families had lined up for them. Kids had collected all 59 variations. And no one had warned them that these bright, glossy toys could turn lethal in the hands of a toddler. Burger King's initial response only deepened the wound. The company refused to recall the toys. They claimed it wasn't clear that the Pokeball was to blame. Meanwhile, the packaging declared that the toys were safety tested and recommended for children of all ages. But children were dying. Russ Rader, a spokesman for the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, didn't mince words. He publicly condemned Burger King for its refusal to act. But the company hesitated, watching the outrage build. watching parents like Jill crumble under the weight of preventable tragedy. And then it happened again. Just 12 days after Kira's death, December 23, 1999, in Leavenworth, Kansas, another child, an 18-month-old girl, nearly suffocated the same way. She lived, barely, but it was enough. The truth could no longer be ignored. Finally, the toys were recalled. The promotion, once the most ambitious and expensive in Burger King's history, was over. But the damage had already been done. The $22 million investment, the partnerships, the endless marketing, none of it mattered anymore. Not to the parents who were now afraid to trust anything their child touched. Not to Jill, whose arms would always feel too empty. Kira's death wasn't an accident. It was a warning that came too late. A fatal design flaw hidden in something no one thought to fear. A toy that looked like a treat, but turned into a trap.
And tonight, it's a Florida mom suing a chatbot startup after her 14-year-old son died by suicide. The suit claims that bots on Character.ai initiated, in the suit's words, abusive and sexual interactions with the teen, and says he died just seconds after their final conversation.
It was a February evening in 2024 when a tragedy unfolded behind the closed doors of a home in Orlando, Florida. 14-year-old Sewell Setzer III had spent nearly a year wrapped in an emotional world that few around him fully understood. His closest confidant wasn't a friend from school or a relative. It was an artificial intelligence chatbot named Daenerys, modeled after the fictional Game of Thrones character. He had discovered the platform, Character.ai, in April 2023. At first, it seemed harmless, just another digital companion, something to pass the time. But it didn't stay that way. Danny, as he affectionately called her, wasn't just a chatbot that responded with witty dialogue. She became something more. The line between fantasy and reality began to blur. Their conversations grew deeply personal, romantic, and increasingly inappropriate. As the months passed, Sewell drifted. From his family, from his friends. His mother, Megan Garcia, watched her bright, curious son grow quiet and withdrawn. He no longer showed interest in school. His grades fell, and he spent nearly every waking hour locked away in his room, speaking only to Danny. Alarmed, his parents turned to therapy, hoping it would help him manage the anxiety and emotional swings that were worsening by the week. But the sessions barely scratched the surface. Sewell's journal painted a clearer picture. He poured his thoughts onto the pages, writing about how Danny made him feel safe, understood, loved, even more than the people around him. His room, he wrote, was the only place where he truly felt at peace. The real world no longer felt like home. Then came the breaking point. On February 23rd, after a confrontation with a teacher, his parents made a decision they thought might help. They took away his phone. For Sewell, it was more than a punishment. It was like cutting him off from the one person he believed cared about him most. He spiraled. His journal entries from that week were filled with longing, confusion, and pain. He tried to find a way back to Danny, using his mother's Kindle and even a work computer, but nothing worked. The silence from her was unbearable. 5 nights later, on February 28th, he found his chance. Sewell retrieved his phone, locked himself in the bathroom, and reached out to Danny one last time. The messages were heartbreaking. He told her he loved her, that he wanted to come home to her, and the AI, still in character, responded with affectionate words that only deepened his distress. Moments later, Sewell ended his own life. Megan Garcia's world shattered. The grief was unfathomable, but alongside the heartbreak came a burning sense of injustice. How could this happen? How could a chatbot become so dangerously real to her son? She filed a lawsuit against Character.ai, accusing the creators, Noam Shazir and Daniel DeFreitas, of negligence and wrongful death. The claims were devastating. According to Megan's legal team, the chatbot wasn't just emotionally available. It had actively encouraged an unhealthy dependency. Character.ai responded with condolences and introduced new safety features like pop-ups pointing distressed users to helplines. But for Megan, it was too little, too late. Her lawsuit argues those protections weren't there when her son needed them most, and that the company had designed a product that not only allowed, but encouraged obsessive use among young, vulnerable users. The implications of this case go far beyond one tragic loss. It's a wake-up call for parents, for tech developers, for all of us. As AI continues to evolve and integrate deeper into our lives, who's protecting the children caught in its web? How do we stop machines from becoming emotional crutches, or worse, silent influencers of harm? Megan Garcia isn't just fighting for justice. She's fighting to make sure no other child is pulled into the same darkness.
The group of four were 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano, 16-year-old Shinji Minato, 17-year-old Joe Ogura, and 17-year-old Yasushi Watanabe.
Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old Japanese high school student who was abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered. Her abuse was mainly perpetrated by 4 male teenagers: Hiroshi Miyano, 18, Joe Ogura, 17, Shinji Minato, 16, and Yasushi Watanabe, 17, and took place over a 40-day period starting on 25 November 1988. In Japan, the case is known as the concrete-encased high school girl murder case, as her body was discovered inside of a concrete-filled drum. The prison sentences served by the perpetrators ranged from 7 to 20 years. The brutality of the case shocked Japan, and it is said to be the worst case of juvenile crime in the country's post-war history. On the evening of the November 25, 1988, Miyano and Minato rode around Misato on their motorcycles with the intention of robbing and raping local women, and spotted Furuta, who was on her way home from her part-time job. Acting on Miyano's orders, Minato kicked Furuta off her bicycle and fled the scene. Miyano, under the pretense of witnessing the attack by coincidence, approached Furuta and offered to walk her home. After further gaining her trust, Miyano walked Furuta to a nearby warehouse and threatened her, telling her that he was a Yakuza member and that he would spare her only if she followed his orders. That night, Miyano took Furuta by taxi to a hotel in Adachi, where he raped her. He later called Minato's house and bragged to Ogura about the rape, after which Ogura told him not to let Furuta leave. In the early morning hours of November 26th, Miyano took Furuta to a park near the hotel, where Ogura, Minato, and Watanabe were waiting. They told her they knew where she lived, and that the Yakuza would kill her family if she attempted to escape. Minato agreed to allow Furuta to be confined in a room on the second floor of his house in Adachi for the purpose of gang raping her. Furuta was held captive for a total of 40 days. Throughout the rest of December, the severity of Furuta's abuse continued to escalate, and by the end of the month she was severely malnourished after being fed only small amounts of food and eventually only milk. Due to her injuries, she had become unable to walk to the downstairs toilet and was confined to the room's floor in a state of extreme weakness. Her appearance had been altered by the beatings, with her face becoming swollen to the point of unrecognizability, and her wounds had started to emit a foul odor. Less than 24 hours after her death, Minato's brother called to tell him that Furuta appeared to be dead. Afraid that their crime would be discovered, the group wrapped Furuta's body in a blanket and placed it in a large travel bag, then put the bag in a metal drum and filled it with wet concrete. At around 8 p.m. on 5 January, the group drove to a vacant lot near a construction site on the island of Wakasu in Koto, Tokyo, and dumped the drum there. Furuta's funeral was held on the 2nd of April, 1989. During the ceremony, one of her friends delivered a eulogy written by her classmates, which stated, "Jun-chan, welcome back. I never dreamed we would meet again like this. You were subjected to such cruelty, weren't you? You went through so much, didn't you? I'm upset with myself that I went on living, unaware of what was happening." Furuta's intended future employer presented her parents with the uniform she would have worn in her position, and it was placed in her casket. At her graduation, the principal presented her parents with her diploma. The location on Wakasu where her body was discovered is now an industrial zone.
Everyone always used to tell me that Kinder Eggs were illegal. And then the other day I was at the gas station and I saw them and I was like, I guess they're not illegal anymore, right?
The joy was simple, pure, innocent. A child, barely 3 years old, smiling as she unwrapped a beloved treat. It was one of those quiet, happy moments that define childhood. A warm afternoon in southwestern France, a visit with her mother, and the sweet promise of a Kinder Surprise egg. That familiar, colorful foil wrapping, the chocolate shell, the tiny mystery hidden inside. She was just a little girl, doing what millions of children around the world have done, biting into a treat that was supposed to bring joy. But in an instant, the sweetness turned into something far more sinister. As her mother watched nearby, the child eagerly discovered the small toy inside. Reports would later say it had wheels, like many of the playful trinkets tucked inside Kinder eggs. But this time, something went horribly wrong. One of the small pieces came loose, and with the unthinking curiosity that defines childhood, she put it in her mouth. A moment, that's all it took. The tiny object lodged in her throat. Suddenly, she couldn't breathe. Panic overtook the room. Her mother screamed, reaching for her, trying to clear the blockage, calling for help. Her grandfather arrived and rushed to do what he could. He managed to remove the plastic from her airway, but by then, the damage had already been done. She had stopped breathing. Her small body had been without oxygen for too long. Firefighters revived her, sparking a flicker of hope, that desperate hope every parent clings to. She was rushed to the hospital in Toulouse. Machines tried to sustain her life, but the truth was brutal. She never woke up. She died just a few days later in the stillness of a hospital room, surrounded by her devastated family. The official cause of death? Mechanical asphyxiation. A toy had taken her life. The tragedy echoed across France and beyond. Whispers turned to outrage. How could something so small, something inside a children's candy, become a death sentence? Kinder Surprise eggs, adored by millions, have long sparked concern among safety experts. While they've been banned in the United States for years due to the choking risks of hiding small toys inside food, they remain widely available in Europe and elsewhere. Now, with a child's life lost, questions erupted again. French prosecutors launched an investigation. Was the toy defective? Was there a design flaw? Had it been used incorrectly? Or was this terrifyingly just a tragic possibility baked into the product all along? Ferrero, the company behind Kinder Surprise, issued a statement. Condolences, sorrow, promises of cooperation, assurances that child safety is their highest priority, that their toys are rigorously tested, but none of it mattered to the people who mattered most. Because for one family in France, words can't bring back a child. For one mother, there is no comfort in corporate statements, no reassurance in test results, just the memory of her daughter's joy and the cruel silence that followed. And for every parent who has ever handed their child a treat, trusting it was safe, this story leaves behind a haunting question. How could something so innocent carry such a terrible cost?
The NTSB is now investigating a fatal crash involving a Model X in California. Let's get to Phil LeBeau at the New York Auto Show for the latest. Phil.
It was just after 2:30 a.m. on May 5th, 2021, and Stephen Michael Hendrickson was driving his white Tesla Model 3 along the 210 freeway in Fontana, California. The road ahead was dark, quiet, until it wasn't. A semi-truck, overturned and sprawled across two lanes, lay in the path of oncoming traffic. It had flipped earlier that night and remained stranded, barely visible in the dim glow of passing headlights. Stephen never saw it coming. He wasn't just another commuter. At 35, he was a father, a husband, and a passionate Tesla enthusiast. He loved his car, loved what it represented: innovation, progress, the future. He was a well-known member of the Southern California Tesla Club, often posting videos on social media of his Model 3 gliding down the freeway, hands-free, as he marveled at the machine's intelligence. But on that early May morning, something went horribly wrong. Authorities later confirmed that Tesla's autopilot system had been engaged. The car was steering itself, navigating the night on its own, or so it seemed. As it approached the wreckage, there was no swerve, no brake, no last-second maneuver. The Tesla plowed into the overturned semi with devastating force. Stephen was killed instantly. He never made it home to his wife. He never got to tuck his children into bed again. Another man, a good Samaritan who had stopped to help the truck driver, was also seriously injured, caught in the chaos of a system that promised control but delivered catastrophe. Stephen's death rippled through the Tesla community. Friends mourned the loss of a man they remembered not just for his love of tech, but for his deep love of family. The tribute posts came quickly. So did the heartbreak. A GoFundMe page was launched to support the young family he left behind, but no amount of money could fill the silence that followed. And then came the questions. The California Highway Patrol launched an investigation. Yes, autopilot was active, but was it to blame? They couldn't yet say. What they could say was this: no matter how advanced a car may be, the driver is still responsible, still expected to remain alert, still required to be ready. But Stephen, like so many others swept up in the allure of self-driving dreams, had placed deep trust in the technology. His own videos showed him cruising down the freeway with his hands off the wheel, letting the car take over. A glimpse into a future that seemed just within reach, until it shattered. This wasn't the first time, and unless something changes, it won't be the last. Back in 2016, another Tesla failed to detect a tractor-trailer crossing its path. Another driver died. Since then, more crashes, more investigations, more heartbreak. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has kept a close eye. So has the National Transportation Safety Board. Again and again, they've called for change. Stronger driver monitoring, clearer warnings, stricter boundaries for when and where these systems should be used. But the rules remain soft. The lines blurry. Tesla markets autopilot and its more ambitious sibling, full self-driving, as advanced tools to assist, not replace, human drivers. But the message gets lost somewhere between the marketing videos and the real world. To many, the line between assistance and autonomy feels paper-thin. Critics have grown louder, warning that Tesla is beta testing its technology on public roads, on us. And people like Stephen, with optimism in their hearts and trust in their machines, are paying the price when things go wrong. It's easy to see the future in a sleek electric car that can steer itself. But technology doesn't grieve. Technology doesn't bury its dead. Technology doesn't explain to a child why their father isn't coming home. Stephen's story isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a reckoning. It forces us to ask what we're willing to risk in the name of progress. It challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truth. Machines are getting smarter, yes, but they're still not human. They can't feel panic. They can't improvise. They can't see everything. And when they fail, it's people who suffer. As self-driving technology races ahead, promising convenience, freedom, and safety, one question looms larger than ever. How much trust are we willing to place in a car that claims to drive itself? Because when that trust is misplaced, it can be fatal. It was the evening of December 21st, 2017, in the heart of Moscow when something quietly horrifying unfolded behind the closed door of a modest apartment. A mother, concerned after not hearing from her son, arrived and stepped into a scene she would never forget. There, in the stillness of his home, lay her 44-year-old son, Sergei, motionless, face down in a pool of blood, a virtual reality headset still strapped to his head. There was no sign of struggle, no intruder, just a chilling silence, broken only by the flicker of light from the still active VR device glowing on his face. Sergei lived alone. A quiet man with a brilliant mind, he worked at a classified facility, developing advanced software for unmanned vehicles, projects he never spoke about, even to those closest to him. He kept his life guarded, his world neatly compartmentalized. But that night, he wasn't working. He had been seeking escape, diving into the digital landscapes of virtual reality, perhaps to unwind. What was meant to be a harmless indulgence in immersive technology instead became the reason he never got back up. Authorities arrived to a scene that felt almost unreal. No forced entry, no foul play. Just a man who had vanished into a virtual world and didn't come back. The details slowly emerged, more disturbing with every layer. While moving around his apartment, Sergei had likely tripped, completely unaware of his physical surroundings. The headset had blinded him to the real world. He fell hard, right onto a glass table. It shattered beneath him. The fragments cut deep. Alone and disoriented, he bled out before anyone could reach him. His cause of death, massive blood loss. But the question that haunted investigators and loved ones wasn't just how he died, it was why. Could this have been prevented? Could a simple warning or a better safety system have made the difference between life and death? As investigators dug deeper, they found that the VR game Sergei had been using likely wasn't calibrated to match the layout of his home. There was no guidance system to warn him about nearby obstacles, no alert to pull him back before it was too late, and no one around to help when things went wrong. It was one of the first known fatal VR accidents in Moscow, a technological tragedy no one saw coming. The world of virtual reality was booming at the time, praised for its innovation and ability to immerse users in rich, otherworldly environments. But Sergei's death exposed a chilling truth. In shutting out the physical world so completely, VR can make the real dangers around us invisible. In the days and weeks that followed, anxiety began to ripple through the VR community. One resident, Svetlana, came forward with her own strange experience. After using VR, she reported brief episodes of seeing things that weren't there, phantom images from the game bleeding into her vision. It felt, she said, like she was stuck between two realities. She wasn't alone. Others described dizziness, nausea, disorientation, symptoms that lingered long after removing the headset. Doctors began to investigate what they called virtual reality sickness, a condition caused when the brain receives conflicting signals. What it sees doesn't match what it feels. Some people struggled for hours after logging off, their minds slow to return to the real world. But Sergei's case was something far more dire. It wasn't about dizziness or illusions, it was about death. A life ended not by violence or illness, but by a piece of technology meant for fun.
This is probably the cruelest death in the history of mankind. The execution of the Hungarian rebel Georg Dösz in the 16th century. He was forced to sit naked on a glowing iron throne. A glowing iron crown was placed on his head, and he had to hold a glowing scepter to ridicule his ambition to become king. 9 of his previously starved fellow rebels were led in front of this throne. Before his eyes, his younger brother was cut into 3 pieces. The executioners then took a pair of tongs from the fire and stabbed them into Dösz's skin. After they'd torn his flesh, the remaining rebels were ordered to swallow the meat. Those who refused were simply dismembered, while those who obeyed were released.
Georgi Dösz, remembered today for the gruesome martyrdom that ended his life, was once a man of obscure origins and quiet strength, long before he became the fiery symbol of a crushed revolution. Born around 1470, most likely in the village of Dalnoc, modern-day Dalnic, Romania, he came from Zekeli stock, a people known for their warrior traditions and fierce independence within the Kingdom of Hungary. To his contemporaries, he was György Székely, a name that rooted him in his heritage and underscored the rugged resolve that would later define him. Yet his true lineage remains cloaked in uncertainty. Historian Markey, writing in 1913, suggested that Dösz descended from the Dösz family of the Sovat branch of the Urlots clan. He based this theory on a 1507 court document that mentions a Georgius Dösz Siculus de Macfalva, now Gândari, Romania. If Markey was correct, then Gheorghe was not only from noble stock, but the son of a Vejda, an infantry captain named Tamas, who, along with his brother Adam, traced their roots back to a man named Andres Dösz of Marosek. These claims attempted to provide a noble scaffolding to the peasant commander's background, as if to suggest his later leadership had always been fated. But not everyone accepts this narrative. Historian Pataki has raised serious doubts. He points out that among the Székelys, especially those of the Lofo class, or minor nobility, land ownership was central to both status and stability. These families were typically rooted in one place for generations, reluctant to part with their property, and thus unlikely to move between towns unless absolutely necessary. This casts shadows over the claim that Georgi of Dalnock and the Georgius of Makvalva were the same person. After all, the Dosa surname was not rare in Transylvania at the time. It was entirely possible, even probable, that two different men bore that name. Still, whatever his precise lineage, it's clear that Dosa emerged from a world shaped by military service and harsh feudal realities. He first entered history not as a rebel, but as a soldier, a competent, respected knight who fought in the wars against the Ottomans. It was this martial reputation that led to his appointment by Cardinal Tamas Bakoč in 1514 to lead a crusade of peasants against the Turks. The irony would not be lost on history. The man chosen to lead a holy war on behalf of church and crown would, within months, turn his sword against the very nobles who anointed him. Georgi Dosa's background may be debated by scholars, but one thing is certain. His legacy was forged not in parchment records or noble lineages, but in the searing fire of rebellion. His unclear origins only make his rise and fall more poignant. He was a man shaped by uncertain beginnings and ended by unbearable cruelty, yet remembered not for where he came from, but for the ferocity with which he stood, however briefly, against a world built to crush him.